everybody, and welcome to a bonus episode of the iRock Knits podcast. Today I'm sharing the 18 books that stuck with me and a few honorable mention. I've got some favorite authors to share with you. I'm an avid reader, and these are books that I had to go into the way back machine for. Really hard to decide, really difficult for me to pick like favorites. I wouldn't even say that they are favorites. What these books have in common for me is that I still remember them. They had an opening or an ending that still sits with me today. So I've got 60 years of reading and being read to with audiobooks that I'm going to share with you today. I also have these prepared for you as a downloadable list. You can get them in my Ravelry group. I will have the list there. I will also try to figure out how to link them on my website, so you could go over to my website and look at them. I think I'll be doing stories on Instagram and then sharing it also to my highlights, so you could get the list of all the names of the books that I'm going to share today. I have some young adult. I have some romance. I have some intrigue, mystery. I have some books that your husbands and daughters might like. I have some books that your wives and sons might like. It really depends on where you're coming at in your reading journey and whether or not this will be something that really resonates with you. What I did was I made a list kind of in copyright order. So we're going to start way back, and the first book is going to go way back to 1971. Some of them even earlier in my honorable mention, but we're going to start there. We're going to work our way through 18. I'm going to go through them kind of quickly and not try to spend too much time on there. What I'd really like to know is whether or not you've read them, this brought up a memory for you, or if you have something that you would suggest, a book that really stuck with you because something memorable in it happened. So let's get started. The first book on my list is Go Ask Alice. It was an anonymous diary. It came out in 1971. I would have been in upper elementary or middle school at that time. I don't think I read it until I was in high school, but I was an avid reader, so there is a chance that I read it in my middle school years, which is maybe why it had such an impression on me. It's 224 pages. It is also still available as an audiobook, so if you prefer to get it that way, you can. What I have done is kept most of these books that are special to me on a shelf in my family room so that I never forget them. But this is told in a diary format, and here's your description. It started when she was served a soft drink laced with LSD in a dangerous party game. Within months, she was hooked, trapped in a downward spiral that took her from her comfortable home and loving family to the mean streets of an unforgiving city. It was a journey that would rob her of her innocence, her youth, and ultimately her life. This is a book told after the death of this young person. Like I said, it was told a long time ago. But it was my first experience with reading about people with drug addiction, and it just resonates in my mind. Of course, I went on to work with many recovering students when I taught in the at-risk program. In Wayzata, we had recovering kids who were living at halfway houses, and so I think that, there's a part of me that always is going to cheer for that underdog, the kid that's struggling, having trouble, and this book probably was one of the reasons that started it all. So just a really fond memory for me, Go Ask Alice. The second book, also with my high school years here, number of books by this author. This is My Name is Asher Lev by Chaim Potok, and his book, The Chosen, is probably more popular, or was in the day. I've read almost all of the books by this author, and it was my first reading experience with Judaism, Hasidic Jews living together in community, and I was just a small Midwestern girl and just wasn't aware of the fact that there were communities like this. It was a fascinating read. It is a YA book. came out in 1972. It has 379 pages. And Asher Lev grows up in a cloistered Hasidic community in post-war Brooklyn, a world suffused by ritual and revolving around a charismatic Rebbe. But in time, his gift threatens to estrange him from that world and the parents he adores. As it follows his struggle, My Name is Asher Lev becomes a luminous portrait of the artist, by turns heartbreaking and exultant, a modern classic. He has a gift, and it is not seen as something that he should pursue, and he really struggles living in both worlds. I just have such fond memories of these books. One about a baseball player, Jewish kid, one about a artist. If you have not read anything by this author, you're really missing out, so I would highly recommend. The third book holds such a special place in my heart because I taught this book in the classroom for years. It's called The Chocolate War by Robert Cormier. And there is a sequel called Beyond the Chocolate War, which I would also teach. It came out in 1974 as a YA book, as 253 pages, also available as an audiobook. So far, everything is also still available, and I found almost all the books that are on my list are available as an audiobook, but I have designated the ones that aren't on this list so that you would know. After suffering rejection from seven major publishers, The Chocolate War made its debut in 1974 and quickly became a best-selling and provocative classic for young adults. This chilling portrait of an all-boys prep school casts an unflinching eye on the pitfalls of conformity and corruption in our most elite cultural institutions. A high school freshman discovers the devastating consequences of refusing to join in the school's annual fundraising drive and arousing the wrath of the school bullies. This is such a good book to read with young people because, the peer pressure and the bullies that have happened to them as they grow up coming through school, it really hit home. There is a situation in the book that you could reenact in the classroom. I don't want to give away too much, but it had to do with drawing marbles, and he just says no. He just is not going to sell chocolate, and it just blows up into this huge thing. I'm not sure if any of these first three books would hold up over time. I don't go back and read them every year. I haven't gone back in years and read them. So I don't know if the influx of technology and the way we live our lives now would not ring true in these older versions. I'm hoping that you could get past that and that it would. But just super fond memories. And if you have a student who is really struggling, or someone in your life struggling with bullies and standing up to people, this is so intense. He is not treated well. It's painful to read sometimes, but it draws you in, and you're really rooting for him to, kind of hang in there and stand by his principles and his values, even though, he gets physically assaulted. It's just a fascinating story. And I wouldn't read the first one without going ahead and reading the second one, because just really, really good. And so many of you were jumping forward, but I know these books are still popular, still on a lot of to-be-read lists for people. And so this comes from 1980. We're jumping forward to The Clan of the Cave Bear. I think this is this entire series by Jean Auel was probably my first experience with long novels that took place over a series of books. I fell in love with Ayla right away, and I was reading the back of the book to prepare for this. The Isa and Kreb and the Mogre, I could remember those people. Those were full-fledged characters to me, and they came back all these years later. I still have a fondness for it. I wish they would have done a better job at making the movies, because they were terrible. And I know that there's been a lot of controversy now recently going forth with the author and some of the subsequent later books having some, they had publication issues and the rights to the books and all that kind of stuff. But I just have such a great memory of this being a phenomenal read. A natural disaster leaves the young girl wandering alone in an unfamiliar and dangerous land until she is found by the woman of the clan. People very different from her own kind. To them, blonde, blue-eyed Isla looks peculiar and ugly. She is one of the others, those who have moved into the ancient homeland, but Isa cannot leave the girl to die and takes her with them. Isa and Kreb, the old Mogur, grow to love her, and as Isla learns the ways of the clan and Isa's way of healing, most come to accept her. But the brutal and proud youth who is destined to become their next leader sees her differences as a threat to his authority. He develops a deep and abiding hatred for the strange girl of the others who lives in their midst and is determined to get his revenge. This is also on audiobook, and I do believe I went back years later and re-listened to this first book. So let me know if you've read that whole series and if you're a fan. I couldn't find the hard copy of the next book, and I think I probably loaned it to someone, so I will be getting on Amazon and reordering that, but it comes from 1990. It is Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. I find it funny that it follows right on the heels of The Clan of the Cape Bear because, again, it's another saga, long story that you follow through multiple books. 976 pages, Pillars of the Earth tells the magnificent tale of the 12th century monk driven to do the seemingly impossible, build the greatest Gothic cathedral the world has ever known. Around the site of the construction, Follett weaves a story of betrayal, revenge, and love, which begins with the public hanging of an innocent man and ends with the humiliation of a king. But what makes the book extraordinary is the time, the 12th century, the place, feudal England, and the subject, the building of a glorious cathedral. Follett has recreated the crude, flamboyant England of the Middle Ages in every detail. The vast forests, the walled towns, the castles, and the monasteries become a familiar landscape. And the two books that follow are World Without End and A Column of Fire. So you have 3 in that series that kind of tell that story. I loved these books. I could not stop listening when we listened. I do believe this was early on when we used to have them, buy them on cassette tapes, I'm thinking, and we listened to it on a long trip. It just brought to life the Middle Ages and how the hardships that it would have taken to live there, and then also to build the giant cathedral. And we're going to go right smack into 1991 and another huge series that I read back in the day, but has now become, just a huge bestseller, and everyone is, watching the seasons as they come up. This is Outlander by Diana Gabaldon. There is a set of 9 books in this series. This one had 627 pages. Here's the story that started it all, introducing 2 remarkable characters, Claire Randall and Jamie Fraser, in a spellbinding novel of passion and history that combines exhilarating adventure with a love story for the ages. Scottish Highlands, 1945, Claire Randall, a former British combat nurse, is just back from the war and reunited with her husband on a second honeymoon when she walks through a standing stone in one of the ancient circles that dot the British Isles. Suddenly, she is an outlander in a Scotland torn by war and raiding clans in the year of our Lord, 1743. Also on audiobook. If you have not read these, you really need to get them on your shelves or listen to them. Fascinating story. First, probably of many time travel books that I read. What I used to tell people who weren't sure they wanted to read a time travel is, in the first few chapters, she falls back in time, and then the rest of the book is told back in time. So you don't really need to suspend your belief about if whether or not that could happen for very long, because it happens fairly quickly, and then she's back in time and the story is really told of Jamie. It isn't until later books where she does go back and forth a little, more often. but just super fond memories of this. I remember waiting and waiting for Dragonfly and Amber to come out. I don't know why, if there was a pause there or I just couldn't get a hold of it, but I just remember waiting for that one to come out. I think many of you will know this author, but I'm not sure there will be many who have read this book. It came out in 1991 as well, and it's by Nora Roberts, who is one of my favorite authors back in the day. And her pseudo name, J.D. Robb, is another book, and I will talk about her as an author back then because she was writing under the assumption that she was a man as J.D. Robb and wrote a lot of kind of graphic murder mysteries that I read, but she wrote the romance novels under Nora Roberts. I have such fond memories of reading this book and the two main characters. Of course, it's a romance, so you're going to have, a man and a woman who meet, and then you know the entire novel that they'll probably get together. But burned out by a whirlwind career, world-famous concert violinist Caroline Waverly arrives in Innocence, looking for a little peace and some time to think. She hopes that a stay at her late grandmother's house, the one with a covered porch just made for soft summer nights, will provide the tranquility she needs. But Innocence has something else to offer Caroline. Handsome, charming Tucker Longstreet. To this day, I cannot hear the word Tucker without thinking about this book. Isn't it the best romance novel ever written? No, but it was made into a movie. Not a great movie. It is available as an audiobook, and there is a bit of a mystery involved in this book, so it is a little bit more fledged out than a typical superficial romance novel where you're really not reading as much for the plot and character development. I did feel like at the time this was a little more fledged out in its... So if you are a fan of Nora Roberts and you haven't picked this one up, you should go get that one. I'm sure it's available at all of the discount bookstores for 50 cents. This is another author that I have read a number of books from, and it is a trilogy. It is it's a series that I have handed out to people many times over the years. This is Francine Rivers. It is the Mark of the Lion series, and the first book is A Voice in the Wind. It came out in 1993, and it had 508 pages. While wealthy Roman citizens indulge their every whim, Jews and barbarians are bought and sold as slaves and gladiators in the bloodthirsty arena. Amid the depravity around her, a young Jewish slave girl becomes a light in the darkness. The first book in this inspiring trilogy introduces readers to Hadassah, a young Jewish girl captured and sold into slavery, but still holding firm to her faith. Though torn by the love for a handsome aristocrat, Hadassah becomes a shining beacon of light in the darkness and depravity around her. This was so fascinating to me because it is told before Jesus was born, and it tells about the time in which he would have lived. And to me, that was very interesting because it was, it's a fiction book, but she's researched the time period and how people would have lived and how terrible it would have been to live during that time, told alongside this story of this girl who, is a follower of God, is a Christian. And I was just fascinated. Nothing that I had read before, and now there are lots of books out that are like this, had ever told me about the time period when Jesus was possibly meeting the disciples in the Bible. And just historically, it was so fascinating to follow what is a possible, actual things that could have happened. So I highly recommend this entire series. I can't even tell you how many times I've gifted it to people and friends, and they always come back and say, I couldn't put it down. I couldn't stop reading. The writing was so well done, and it just seemed so real, and the historical background information was so good. So even though the trilogy would be a expensive purchase, you could probably find it at the library or at a discount store. That series is available on a set of CDs, so if you wanted to listen to it, I saw it on Amazon, but I did not see it as an audiobook. Okay, talk about books with a big impact. This is Allan Folsom's The Day After Tomorrow that came out in 1994. It is a big book, and this is a thriller. It weaves together 3 stories of international intrigue. In the first, a doctor has to confront his father's killer. In the second, a detective investigates a series of horrific murders. And in the third, an international organization devises a master plan of apocalyptic dimensions. The reason I remember this book is that in the first paragraph, the main character is walking down the street, and he looks across the street, and he sees the man who killed his father. Boom. It takes off within, 6 sentences. You're like, what? And you're so shocked. And that is part of the descriptions on the book. So I am giving away, kind of the thing that makes me remember it. But it was that moment where I was like, oh, this is going to be good, right? They're not pussyfooting around getting to the topic here. They're not going to give us a bunch of description of the landscape and what's around him. They're just going to get right to, the plot. And I just love that. And then following the 3 different stories that, are all eventually going to come together in the end was just fascinating. I will advise you, though, that this is not the book that was made into the movie of the same name. There are other things out there that are called The Day After Tomorrow, and they were not related in any way. So just when you're looking, make sure that you have the Folsom author if this is one that you think you might enjoy reading. Just intrigue, espionage, spies, all that kind of stuff. It was just really an excellent book. I'm running out of room over here to stack up my books. Okay, we're going back again to the little kind of more of the romance genre. Many of you will know this author, Jude Deveraux. This is The Mulberry Tree. This is one of the few hardcover books that I have on my shelf. It was written in 2002 and has 377 pages. I will just read the description. I have such fond memories of this. Lillian, plump, younger wife of billionaire James Jimmy Manville, has always felt isolated in her husband's world, but when he suddenly dies in a plane crash, she is devastated. Then she learns that he left his fortune to his conniving brother and sister. Bereft of any useful skills and with nothing but a broken-down farmhouse in rural Calburn, Virginia, and the animosity of the press, Lillian moves to the farm, changes her name to Bailey James and her appearance so no one will recognize her as the infamous widow. Jimmy's last request was that she seek the truth about the Golden Six, a group of 6 young men who were considered heroes until tragedy struck all of them and their families in 1968. Through her investigation, she uncovers the facts, but more importantly, she finds friends and herself. There are gaps in this promising tale, but the droves of avid Deveraux fans won't mind one bit. And I didn't. I loved this book. It is available on audio, and it just has such a warm place in my heart. I have not read that many books by this author. I have read a couple, but they didn't sit with me the way this one did. And I think it had to do with the fact that she is widowed early on and then has to kind of go on a quest or, solve a mystery. And she has to kind of reinvent herself. And there were just lots of pieces of the plot that I really enjoyed just kind of page turning through. I have an extra copy of this book. So if someone would like this, if you want to pay shipping, I will just ship it to you for, book rate probably could get it to you for $3, something like that. Just let me know if someone, wants the hard copy of that book. This one was actually made into a movie as well. This is like revisiting old friends for me. Same kind of different as me, a modern-day slave, an international art dealer, and the unlikely woman who bound them together by Ron Hall and Denver Moore. 2006. It has 244 pages, and it spoke to my lifting up the helpless, the homeless, the disenfranchised. yeah, it's just such a feel-good story in that way. A dangerous homeless drifter who grew up picking cotton in virtual slavery, an upscale art dealer accustomed to the world of Armani and Chanel, a gutsy woman with a stubborn dream, a story so incredible no novelist would dare dream it. It begins outside a burning plantation hut in Louisiana and an East Texas honky-tonk, and without a doubt in the heart of God. It unfolds in a Hollywood hacienda, an upscale New York gallery, a downtown dumpster, a Texas ranch, gritty with pain and betrayal and brutality. This story also shines with an unexpected life-changing love. It is available on audiobook, and this is just a feel-good story. I mean, there's lots of trials and tribulations, but in the end, you are satisfied that things come together, and it feels pretty good. And I would recommend the movie that they made of this as well. Here's a book with some controversy. I think many of you will remember this and will have read this, but might also remember the controversy surrounding it. This is James Frey's A Million Little Pieces. It came out in 2003, 382 pages. It was one of Oprah's book club choices early on, and then the controversy happened. So first I'll tell you what the book is about. At the age of 23, James Frey woke up on a plane to find his front teeth knocked out and his nose broken. He had no idea where the plane was headed, nor any recollection of the past 2 weeks. An alcoholic for 10 years and a cracked addict for 3, he checked into a treatment facility shortly after landing. There he was told he could either stop using or die before he reached age 24. This is Frey's acclaimed account of his 6 weeks in rehab. There are no quotation marks in this book, random capitalization. It's all just left page aligned, and it has wild kind of paragraph breaks. So if that kind of thing bothers you, it didn't bother me at all at the time. I mean, they do some dialogue, but everything is, there aren't paragraph breaks on the left-hand side. He originally could not get this published, and then he started sending it out as a memoir. And memoirs, as much as they can be, are supposed to be based on the truth and telling the story of one's life. And he embellished quite a bit. And one of the local newspapers here in Minneapolis tried to go out on the internet early on to find a picture of him or to look up. They wanted a picture to run an article, and they couldn't find his mugshot. And he had, described several times that he had been in jail, and they couldn't find, so they dug deeper. And what they found is he really embellished a lot of this story. And he claims, when you're in a drug-induced state of mind, you don't always remember things well. And he wanted to write a good story. So he embellished it, and it shouldn't matter. But Oprah, who stood behind him at first, then got really angry. And the publisher stood behind him, and then they kind of backpedaled and said, we need to make people aware that this is not an actual true memoir of your life. All that being said, I couldn't put this book down. I just read it and read it and read it as fast as I could. But it was also the moment in which, once I was finished, I realized that people can write things that are not the truth and not call them fiction. So this should be a non-fiction book. That's where it's housed in most libraries and bookstores, but it is not a true story. And so it was eye-opening to me in that way, and that's how I will always remember it, because I remember talking to students about the fact that someone could write or print or put in the newspaper things that absolutely are not always true. And so you need to do your due diligence. And I was a journalism major as well and a journalism teacher. So, you're speaking to students who are, not when they're in high school, but someday might write the news, and you need to be aware of. He really pulled the wool over Oprah, his publisher. They didn't do background information to find out if it was true or not. And that piece of it is why it sticks with me to this day. That was the book I read and was like, wow, right? Someone can just pretend that this is their life and publish it as nonfiction, when really some of it was quite fictionalized. I don't have a copy of the next book, but many of you will know it. It is called The Glass Castle by Jeannette Walls from 2006, 288 pages. And this is another book where the opening paragraphs of the first chapter give you a glimpse into what's going to happen. A woman is riding in the back of a taxi and she looks over and she sees one of her parents eating out of a dumpster. And, the book takes off from there. This is a true story. Here's the description. When sober, Jeannette's brilliant and charismatic father captured his children's imagination, teaching them physics, geology, and how to embrace life fearlessly. But when he drank, he was dishonest and destructive. His mother was a free spirit. Her mother was a free spirit who abhorred the idea of domesticity and didn't want the responsibility of raising a family. The Walls children learned to take care of themselves. Fascinating story about the life of this woman. She has gone on to write several other books that are quite good. If you have not read her novels, the one about half-broke horses, something like that. It's ringing a bell. I think we read it for book club. It is available in audiobook. Just a fascinating story. Another great big one. The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo by Stieg Larsson from 2008, 644 pages. Harriet Wenger, a scion of one of Sweden's wealthiest families, disappeared over 40 years ago. All these years later, her aged uncle continues to seek the truth. He hires Mikael Blomqvist, a crusading journalist recently trapped by a libel conviction, to investigate. He is aided by the pierced and tattooed punk prodigy Lisbeth Salander. Together they tap into a vein of unfathomable inquiry and astonishing corruption. This is a book that I read like this the whole time, right? Like, I just couldn't believe what I was reading over and over and over again. It's naughty, it's descriptive, it's dark, it's evil. Lisbeth is weird, brilliant. I just devoured this. I did go and watch the movies afterwards. There are several books in this series. I always remember, because it just starts, it stands out as this in-your-face cover, and that's how the book is, right? Like, just so good. But it was also in translation, right? It was written in Swedish and translated, which is something that I hadn't read a lot of. I would like to listen to this, because I think if you had a really good audiobook narrator, it would be intense to listen to. I'm pretty sure I read it. I don't think I listened to it. Back in the day, it would have been on CD maybe, and we did listen to a lot of stuff in the car on trips. But that fascinating book. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, a really nice fairy tale-like story that I have the warmest spot in my heart for. And this is The Snow Child by Auel Ivy. Came out in 2012. I did not read this until maybe 2017 or 18. Like, it had been out for a long time before I got to it. 390 pages. It takes place in Alaska in 1920. A brutal place to homestead, and especially tough for recent arrivals Jack and Mabel. Childless, they are drifting apart. He breaking under the weight of the work of the farm, she crumbling from loneliness and despair. In a moment of levity, during the season's first snowfall, they build a child out of snow. The next morning, the snow child is gone, but they glimpse a young, blonde-haired girl running through the trees. This is also available as an audiobook. This is just the best story. You are constantly telling yourself that it cannot be true, but it is told in a way that makes you feel like it's true. And it's just lovely, and these two older people are just so delighted to have this little girl. And one of my favorite memories in recent times of reading a book. And I just can't imagine that will go away, that, she becomes such a big part of their lives, yet you're wondering the entire time, are they hallucinating? Have they died? Is this a dream? All those things to try to kind of coincide with the fact that you know that it can't be true, but you want it to be, and it seems so true. Yeah, I just love this book. Oh, and another young adult novel that I just loved and read as an adult more recently. This is The War That Saved My Life by Kimberly Brubaker Bradley. It's a YA book that came out in 2015. It has 316 pages. Man, did I love these books. There were two, and I'm pretty sure I listened to these both on audio, and the narrator was great. 10-year-old Ada has never left her one-bedroom apartment. Her mother is too humiliated by Ada's twisted foot to let her outside. So when her little brother Jamie is shipped out of London to escape the war, Ada doesn't waste a minute. She sneaks out to join him. So begins a new adventure for Ada and for Susan Smith, the woman who is forced to take the two kids in. This is available as an audiobook. Again, an underdog, right? That is the type of book that I think speaks to my heart so many times. Someone who has a challenge that seems insurmountable, and then they, you're reaching for them the entire time, whether it be, a physical handicap, a mental handicap, a drug addiction, any of those things. Those books just sit with me. They tear at my heartstrings, and then I have such fond memories of them. The second book is called The War I Finally Won. It is 416 pages. I may have talked about this on the podcast early on because I have read it in the last 3 years, and that's how long I've been podcasting. Maybe not, but anyway. It was a Newbery Honor Book, which is an award for young adult fiction. So anything that ever has the silver label on it. I used to read all the Newbery Honor Books every year because I have my master's degree in developmental reading, so I took a lot of children's literature and young adult literature when I was getting my master's degree, and we used to just read all of for sure the winners, but then you'd read a lot of the honor books too because you could use them in your classroom or teach or whatever. Even though many of them were written for younger ages and not quite as appropriate in the classroom. I just have fond memories of that. Okay, I've talked about this book at length. You all know I love it. You know I love him as an author. This is The Life We Bury by Allan Eskens. Of all the books, all 18 of these books, please start with this one. If you have not read this yet, you need to read this book, because he's a Minnesota author, and I just want to support him in all the ways. He has written several books since this one, one a sequel, and we will get to some of the other books in the honorable mention. But it came out in 2014. There's 300 pages. It is available as an audiobook. College student Joe Talbert has the modest goal of completing a writing assignment for an English class. His task is to interview a stranger and write a brief biography of the person. With deadlines looming, Joe heads to a nearby nursing home to find a willing subject. There he meets Carl Iverson, and soon nothing in Joe's life is ever the same. Carl is a dying Vietnam veteran and a convicted murderer. The sequel to the book is The Shadows We Hide. I love books that take place in Minnesota. I have read all the Monkey Wrench gang books. I have read William Kent Kruger. I mean, there are tons to listen, to find. And you can look up local people to you and find books that are written about. But the fact when Joe drives to the U of M and he's on the roads that I know, and he goes down to Albert Lee and where his mom is living, like those types of things, I just love that. I feel like I'm even taken in more to a book that is told about a place where I live. So definitely everyone should read this book. Okay, we're on number 18 already, and this is the most recent book that I have read that literally has stuck with me, and I think will forever. And I did talk about it on the podcast. I went out and bought a hardcover of it. I just wanted to have it, but I also want to give it to my daughter to read. This is by Rebecca Serle. It came out in 2020, 251 pages, super fast read. Danny Cohen lives her life by the numbers. She is nothing like her lifelong best friend, the wild, whimsical, believes in fate Bella. Her meticulous planning seems to have paid off after she nails the most important job interview of her career and accepts her boyfriend's marriage proposal in one fell swoop, falling asleep completely content. But when she awakens, she's suddenly in a different apartment with a different ring on her finger and beside a very different man. Danny spends 1 hour exactly, 5 years in the future, before she wakes again in her own home on the brink of midnight. But it is 1 hour she cannot shake. In 5 years is an unforgettable love story, but it is not the one you're expecting. This book was fascinating. And my friend Stacy agrees. She said, Cori, I read it in one day. And I know a few others of you have read it as well. I just couldn't believe it as I was listening because I kept thinking, this is so dumb. Like, you can't go 5 years in the future. What is happening? Like, why is this happening? Why does she believe it to be true? The whole time, and then the story just pulls you along, and the twists that happen are so fascinating. It's just really well done. So I think this is going to be a hardcover on my bookshelf of 18 books that stuck with me. I just absolutely loved it. And I couldn't stop listening. I want to go back and listen to it again. I don't know if it would be as good the second time because you're going to know all the surprises. But man, it was just delightful. Okay, now I have 13 honorable mention books, and I'm just going to list their titles. I won't say too much about them, but they're going to be on the handout list if you decide to go and get that and print that out. And I did these in order of alphabetical order as I was typing them up. 1949, Death Be Not Proud by John Gunther. Read it in junior high. Had not read a book about a child's death. The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. Amazing movie, but if you haven't read the book. Grain Brain, The Surprising Truth About Wheat, Carbs, and Sugar. Eye-opening. Jacob Have I Loved, a young adult novel that I taught about twin girls by Catherine Patterson. Came out in 1980. I don't know if it would stand up. 244 pages. I loved that book. Johnny Tremaine by Esther Forbes. Came out in 1943, but I read it in junior high. And the scene where Johnny is in the blacksmith shop and the accident happens, I can still picture all these years later. Almost all of these are also available as audiobooks. I have been checking that. Kitchens of the Great Midwest. I love J. Ryan Stradall. He's a Minnesota author. That came out in 2015. I did talk about it on the podcast, I'm pretty sure. Really funny. Profanity. If that offends you, I just found this a super good book. Number One Detective Ladies Agency, Alexander McCall Smith. I loved that entire series. Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking by Susan Cain came out in 2013. My daughter sat me down and said, you need to read this because you're trying to raise me as an extrovert and I'm an introvert. And I taught everyone in the world as if they were like me, and I didn't know that there were kids who were so introverted that speaking up in class or working in a group would have been such a challenge. I am so thankful that I know what I know now, but I wish I would have known it before Kyla was born. I don't think I did any harm to anyone, but I really pushed her to be outgoing and social, and she loves to be by herself alone to recharge. She can be very social, as can my husband, but they're both so different from me, and my eyes were opened. Sarah's Key by Tatiana de Rosnay in 2008. If you have not read that, the ending will leave you weeping. The Shell Seekers by Rosamund Pilcher. I love a lot of her books, but that was one from 1987. Just such an epic novel. The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry. I still think about Harold Fry walking So I think he should be on my mentions list. It came out in 2013, but I didn't read it until maybe a year ago and talked about it on the podcast. And then The Wheat Belly, Lose the Weight, Lose the Wheat, and Find Your Way Back to Health by William Davis. I picked up that book sitting in my chiropractor's office and read the first chapter and was shocked that all the symptoms that were mentioned in the book were symptoms I was having, which started me on my gluten-free journey in 2015, where I then lost 25 pounds and felt better than I had felt in a long time with fibromyalgia. It's 400 pages. He does a lot of research, fascinating, a really good book. And then Ordinary People by Judith Guest, the Minnesota author. Again, sad, epic tragedy novel, but really, really enjoyed it. The other authors that I have written down are authors from my reading life, where I just read all their series, and so many of you will know these as well. I've read a lot of books by Jeffrey Archer, Jan Karon in the Mitford series, Patricia Cornwall in the Scarpetta series, Nelson DeMille books, Janet Ivanovich in the Stephanie Plum series, Dick Francis, the Horse Track Detective. My husband and I have listened to every book of his on traveling journeys. Sue Grafton and her Alphabet series, John Grisham, Tammy Hogue, Jodi Picoult, Sarah Paretsky and the V.I. Warshawski series, Rosamund Pilcher, who I mentioned, but I have read so many of her books, J.D. Robb, who wrote the In Death series, which are really dark murder mysteries, detective, intense but wonderful books. There's a giant series of those that I read back in the day. And then some young adult authors from my reading life: Judy Blume, Robert Cormier, John Green, Lois Lowry, Gary Paulson, who's a Minnesota author, his book Hatchet. I did an entire themed book unit on when I got my master's degree, Cynthia Voigt and Paul Zindel. So I'm hoping that this was fairly quick and a nice description. I've always wanted to do this, to talk to someone about the books that I've loved, you know, not just in the moment books, but books that I've loved from my past that have kind of, for me, stood the test of time and stuck with me. So I really appreciate you going on this journey and reminiscing with me. If you have books that you would like to suggest to me, I do have an audiobook recommendation thread in my Ravelry group, or you can always just send me a DM on Instagram or an email at Cori@irocknits.com. This was a lot of fun for me. It took a little getting everything organized and alphabetizing lists and finding out copyright dates and whether or not the books were available in audiobook, but every time I would go to a new book, I would read the kind of paragraphs about it and I would say, oh, I remember that book so well. So it was super fun. Share with me the one or two books that you found have really resonated with you over the years, right? Books that you've read that just have stuck with you. I would love to know that. And I'll see you in a couple of weeks on my knitting podcast. Talk to you all later. Love you all. Bye.